Hi, my name is Ray Hanania, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and what I do. Um, I am a writer. I was a journalist for many years. I covered Chicago City Hall from 1976 until 1992. Technically, I'm not really a journalist anymore. I've kind of shifted away from reporting, which is the factual, discovery of issues, and I've moved into opinion commentary. So basically, what I do is I write my opinions analyzing things that I've spent a lot of years covering, like politics. Politics here in the United States and politics in the Middle East. Writing columns is not the same as being an objective journalist, and I always point that out because people think, Ray, why are you taking sides? You're a journalist. I'm not a journalist. I'm an opinion columnist, and I analyze issues that are reported on by journalists that I respect and agree with. Um, I originally wanted to be a doctor. And when I went to school at Northern, that's what I studied. But into my second year, my draft number during the Vietnam War was pretty low, and I was about to be drafted, so I enlisted in the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force. I spent 2 years in the Air Force, and as the war wound down, I was honorably discharged in 1975. I went back to the University of Illinois at Circle Campus in Chicago to finish my medical studies, pre-med, which is what I wanted to do, and what my parents wanted me to do. But about 2 years into it, as I was completing my studies, I had gotten active in advocating for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and also advocating for a Palestine state. My father is from Jerusalem, and my mother is from Bethlehem. As a result of that, I'd write a lot of letters to the editor of Newsweek and Time Magazine, and I got published quite often. So apparently that caught the attention of the FBI, and they began an investigation into my activities, an investigation that was documented in a report that was about 45 pages long. The report began, the FBI, secret FBI report, began with the assertion that they suspected that I was a individual involved in terrorist activity, which was ridiculous, but that's, and because I just served in the U.S. Air Force, you would think they'd know who I was. And I had a security clearance while I was in the Air Force. But when I left, the FBI investigated me for 2 years, believing I was a terrorist, but they concluded the 2 years, what a waste of money, taxpayer dollars, with the conclusion that Ray Hanania was just interested in bettering his community, that he wanted to help Arab Americans and get them more involved, and that he was active in the empowerment of Arab Americans in our American system. And they said I'm a good guy. If something changes, then they'd reopen the investigation. But what caught my eye was another paragraph right after that that concluded with the caution to FBI agents not to interview Ray Hanania. And apparently this was their policy during the 2 years. Don't talk to me because I was a writer, and that I was also publishing a small little newspaper called the Middle Eastern Voice, and they feared that I would write a story about what they were doing and bring attention to clearly what was an illegal act to investigate an American citizen, which is what I was. When I saw that, I realized how powerful communication was, that even an agency like the FBI was afraid of it. And I realized that maybe that was the challenge that Arabs in America faced, that we were not doing a good enough job of telling our story to the American people. And I switched from pre-med to writing and politics, and I studied under a veteran political professor named Milton Rakove, who was one of the best in the country. And he happened to be Jewish, and the two of us had long conversations about the fact that we both supported peace and we both wanted to do something that might help Palestinians and Israelis get along. But he had written something in one of his books, and we talked about that a lot too. He mentioned that a lot of Arabs had no voice in local government because most of the Arabs did not vote. And if you don't vote, the politicians don't care about you. So I spent most of my time getting involved in writing to tell my story, one, to educate the American public, because I believe the American public is the most influential public in this world, especially when it comes to Israel and Palestine, more so than any other audience. And I also focused on techniques of strategic communications. Perception is reality. It's not what you say, but how you say it. It's how you look. I remember watching a debate on television between an Israeli and the Palestinian Arab. And the Israeli looked American, sounded American, dressed American. He didn't just speak English, he spoke baseball American. I mean, he was like inside, more American, I think, than the people he was talking to on the national TV show. And the Arab, on the other hand, had a 3-day growth, kind of like a beginnings of a beard. He had a heavy accent. He mispronounced a lot of words. He wasn't really dressed up in a suit. He didn't look American, didn't sound American. So that distracts from the truth. The audience looked at him and didn't like him. And because of that, that influences how they respond to the message that he was giving. He had the right message that the Palestinians were being denied their rights by Israel, and that Israel's government was often doing things that were wrong, and yet the Americans would not listen. And a lot of it had to do with how he was presenting that message. So in order to present the message to Americans, you really need to change. You need to understand how they think. You don't talk about yourself, you talk about them. You get to know them. You come across as a friend, because people will believe somebody that they feel is a friend. They will not believe a stranger. If you act like a stranger, you will never win over people and win support. The other aspect that I really believe was very important was the challenge of getting Arab Americans to engage in the political system and to understand that American politics is different from Middle East politics. In the Middle East, dictators would get 99.9% of the vote. There was no competition. In the United States, if a candidate or a politician and you only share 66% of the views, in other words, if I agree with a politician's views only 66% of the time, why should I oppose that politician just because that politician disagrees with 33%, that I disagree with 33% of the issues? The tendency on the part of the Arabs is to look at that small percentage that we disagree with and make that the factor that defines our relationship with politics. That 33% in which we disagree should not overshadow the 66% in which we do agree. And I think that it was very important to explain to Arabs that when we support candidates, there will not be a candidate that agrees with us 100%, that we will have to support candidates that only agree with us 66%, but if we get engaged and we do support candidates and get involved and we empower our community by voting and by communicating and connecting with these elected officials, that we would have a better chance of changing that 33%. And I think that's really critical. The other aspect is, I know that, of course, I think most of them are extremists, but to me, the Middle East conflict is not between Palestinians and Israelis. It's between moderates and extremists. And there are moderates and extremists on both sides. So I try to define myself as a moderate Palestinian voice. I also limit my criticism as much as I can, and sometimes I don't do it, but it's not intentional. I limit my criticism to government policies, not people. I'm not against Israel. I support Israel and Palestine in the context of two states. I think in a peace agreement we both can live together and fight together against the extremists, oppose violence, and I'm very opposed to the use of violence. I don't believe that it achieves anything. So I criticize Israel's government and the Palestinians, but the balance is so much more in favor, the power balance is so much more in favor of the Israelis. And a lot of my writing focuses on Israeli government policies, which have a greater impact over everyone that lives in Israel and Palestine. I do criticize Hamas, I do criticize the Palestine National Authority, I criticize the PLO, but most of my criticism is focused on the Israeli government because they have the power balance. They're in control. So people read and say, well, you're just a big critic of Israel. No, I'm not a critic of Israel. I am a critic of Israel's policies, the policies of its government. I do use the word apartheid to describe some of those policies because I think when you segregate people and you distinguish between people when it comes to government services, and many of my relatives are Israeli citizens, they're discriminated against. It's not just the Palestinians who live under the occupation. I also believe that Israel's government has become much more anti-peace, that they don't want peace, they want the land, and they've been hiding behind the failure of Palestinians to actively embrace peace without violence. I believe in nonviolence. I believe in civil disobedience. I believe in everything that Martin Luther King Jr. stood for in fighting for the civil rights of African Americans in the United States. And I think Palestinians need to do the same thing. But those are some of the things, and I thought it was important that you understand that. In addition to writing, I've written several books. One of them was called I'm Glad I Look Like a Terrorist, Growing Up Arab in America. It's a humor book, and I have a lot of belief as another aspect of strategic communications that humor is a very powerful form of communications. So in addition to understanding perception, in addition to understanding the targeting of audiences when you communicate, in addition to understanding how you look, how you present yourself, how you articulate your issues. Again, it's not what you say, but how you say it. You also can use humor to convey your message, the most important messages that you have. I do this for non-Arab clients. Today I own a company, Urban Strategies Group, and I do media consulting for a lot of mainstream American politicians and governments. But I try to use those same techniques to help Arabs and also to help Israelis better understand things. In 2007, I co-founded with a friend of mine who was Israeli, the Israeli-Palestinian Comedy Tour. You can get information on that by visiting israelipalestiniancomedy.com. Or you can visit my website at rayhanania.com, hanania.com, or thedailyhookah.com. If you go there, you can see the links to all my writings, which appear currently in the Arab News newspaper in Saudi Arabia, where I analyze Middle East issues, and in 7 newspapers here in the Chicagoland area, where I analyze Illinois and Chicago politics. I hope that you get a chance to read some of what I write, and I try to respond to everybody that reaches out to me. If you send me an email, I'd be happy to respond and explain things and talk about issues. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it, and I hope this little introduction of who I am will help you understand what I'm trying to achieve.